and a neutral relief vessel, Emo. From the shores of the bustling port, hundreds of astonished onlookers watch as the two vessels continue on what is fast becoming an inevitable collision course.
What is she doing?
Elle continue d'arriver.
Now a blazing fireball, Monblanc begins drifting toward the shore and the city's busiest industrial district. The Halifax Explosion. Residents of harbour towns have a special relationship with the sea. They depend on her bounties for their livelihoods, thus hold greater reverence for her mystery and majesty. But living in such close proximity to oceans can also put coastal dwellers in greater jeopardy, especially in times of war. By December of 1917, the First World War had raged on for nearly 4 interminable years. Casualties topped the 20 million mark, and on the continents of Europe and North America, a jaded acceptance was slowly sinking in. War had become the norm. For maritime ports like Halifax, Nova Scotia, that was perhaps as much a blessing as a curse.
Halifax was founded as a fortress city, and ever since its beginnings, its fortunes rose in time of war and fell in time of peace. Before 1914, work was short, a lot of unemployed. Then the war started, and suddenly the place was booming.
Halifax, and across the channel her much smaller sister city, Dartmouth, had been blessed with an outstanding 18-mile natural harbour that could keep an entire fleet safe from the fearsome weather conditions of the adjacent North Atlantic and from marauding enemy submarines.
Halifax is far and away the most important port on this side of the North Atlantic for a number of reasons. First of all, Canada is deeply involved in the war, and we're shipping supplies, including horses and men, overseas. Secondly, it's where we're receiving most of the convalescent soldiers who live to come back from the war. Third and most important is that all neutral ships must come through Halifax. So Halifax Harbor is not only a supply point, a reception point, but an inspection point. So it's a very, very busy harbor.
Despite the abundance of black armbands and widow's weeds, patriotism was riding high. The city was alive with activity, filled to overflowing with soldiers, sailors, and civilians attracted by the ready employment. The excitement consumed everyone, especially young boys enamored with the romance of the sea, like 13-year-old James Patterson, whose teacher had to reprimand him more than once to keep his mind on his studies, not the activities in the harbor.
We were interested in marine life, there's no question about it, because, well, it was up and down all the time in the harbor, and of course we saw a lot of it. Once the convoys were going up and assembling up in the basin, then of course that was quite an occasion when one of these convoys would leave the harbor, and it was quite an occasion to watch them. There were 4 of us in the family, 4 children. My brother Gordon then Catherine, and then Alan, the youngest. My father was mechanical superintendent at the Acadia Sugar Refinery.
James Patterson's father, like many of the middle-class working population, chose to live in the Richmond district near their places of work. A settlement of cozy wooden houses set on gracefully sloping streets, it was the industrial hub of the city.
Richmond was a community in itself. It had its own churches, its own schools. Many of the men worked at the sugar refinery or at the docks, of course, but the big employer was the railway.
In Richmond, as in the rest of Halifax, December 5th, 1917 dawned as just another day in a busy wartime harbour. Within the confines of Bedford Basin, one of the massive convoys that had so impressed 13-year-old James Patterson was preparing for the dangerous passage across the North Atlantic. Several nights earlier, a French steamer, the Monblanc, had slipped quietly out of Gravesend Bay, New York, en route to Halifax. At 4 in the afternoon of December 5th, her lookout sighted the coast of Nova Scotia. They must have been relieved to have arrived safely, for Monblanc was loaded down with a dangerous cargo of munitions to be delivered to the desperately needy French military.
The Monblanc was sent to Canada by the British because it was too slow for an American convoy. In those days, there were fast convoys and slow convoys. And the Monblanc, to put it mildly, went about as fast as a jogger, about 7.5 knots. It was terribly slow. In fact, there was some doubt that it would even get in a slow convoy. And the cargo was preposterous. I mean, it was a floating bomb.
Deep inside the hold of the former passenger steamer lay 2,300 tons of wet and dry picric acid, 200 tons of TNT, 10 tons of gun cotton, and 35 tons of benzol. On her deck, a 90 and a 95 millimeter gun were mounted fore and aft, with over 300 live rounds placed next to them in case of attack by dreaded German U-boats.
It came up carrying that cargo right up the coast with no protection, except its own 2 guns, which would have been farcical. It also carried 6 extra crew gunners to man the guns. So on top of that, it had extra crew. I mean, it was just a preposterous ship to be anywhere.
Montblanc's captain, 39-year-old Aimé Le Médec, hadn't mastered this plodding vessel before and had never piloted such a volatile cargo of munitions. Very much aware of the powder keg beneath him, Le Médec was taking all possible precautions to prevent an explosion. In fact, no member of the 39-man crew was even permitted to carry a box of matches in his pocket. At the entrance to the harbour channel, Monblanc took on board Francis Mackey, a local pilot who would guide them through the busy harbour. Yet Monblanc had arrived at Halifax about an hour too late. The anti-submarine nets had been closed for the night. No vessels could enter or leave until 7:30 the next morning. With pilot Mackey on board, Le Médec and his men dropped anchor just off McNabb's Island to wait for clearance to enter in the morning. On the other side of the submarine nets, at the very same time that evening, another vessel was being trapped inside the harbour. Imo was a former Norwegian whaler en route to New York to pick up relief supplies for Belgium. As a neutral vessel, she was forced to check in at Halifax for clearance after crossing the Atlantic, as well as to refuel.
Neutrals were not allowed ashore because of the danger of having spies among them. The Imo should have left the previous day, but the ship, the little coaling vessel, which was to bring coal for her voyage to New York, was late in arriving. So there they were, stuck on board ship. They must have been extremely impatient to leave.
As darkness descended on the maritime city, Sailors, soldiers, and civilian families obediently pulled down their blackout curtains and retired for the night. And so Halifax slept, unaware of what the chilly morning of December the 6th would bring. Sea Tales will return in a moment.
Size 4 flowered dress, $45. New color lipstick, $15. Haircut, $25. Autofocus camera, $260. 5 generations in one photograph. Priceless. There are some things money can't buy. For everything else, there's MasterCard. Accepted all over, even photo labs.
Just when you think you know where the new Dodge is headed, they turn things around on you. Introducing Durango, a whole new kind of roomy, powerful, versatile sport utility. As you can see, the new Dodge is covering new ground, some of which seems to be covering me. Durango, new ground for the new Dodge.
There comes a time when you realize you've come about as far as you can on your own. And if you want your investments to go further, you're going to need someone with the expertise and the resources to help you go the distance. It's not an admission of failure. It's an admission of success. It's an acknowledgement of what you've got at stake here. That moment of truth when you say to yourself, okay, no more fun and games.
Smith Barney, they make money the old-fashioned way. They earn it.
Why did the frog cross the road? He didn't. We've rebuilt one of the greatest video game heroes of all time, and now he's back. Frogger on CD-ROM. The classic arcade game is back and better than ever with more graphics, more worlds, more enemies, more superpowers, and it's more addictive than ever. The hardest part is turning it off. Frogger on CD-ROM for PC and PlayStation game console. Revived, rebuilt, and ready to hop.
Hey, buddy. You okay?
We now return to Sea Tales on A&E. In the busy wartime port of Halifax, Nova Scotia, December 6th dawned clear, crisp, and cold. In the Richmond district, fathers kissed their wives and children goodbye, then hurried off to work. Children bundled into their winter jackets for the walk to school.
Being 4 young ones, the morning was quite a busy time. Gordon and I and Alan got out to school. I don't know just why. Catherine didn't go with us anyway, but she was still in the house. My father's watch just so happened was down at the jeweler's having a mainspring, and he wanted to know if he could have my watch. Well, I wasn't too happy, but I said, yes, you have my watch, because I thought it too was quite an honor that he wanted my watch.
As James Patterson's father began his walk to the sugar refinery, out in Halifax Harbour, the submarine nets were cleared and incoming vessels lined up in formation, awaiting their turn to enter the busy channel. The first boat to start in was a newly arrived American tramp steamer. Monblanc was close behind her. Inside Bedford Basin, the Emo had begun to move in the opposite direction on her way out of the harbour and had just entered the area known as the Narrows. According to the rules of the road, she was still on the incorrect side of the channel, but was heading toward her proper course when she saw the American tramp steamer coming toward her from the opposite shore.
The pilot signaled to the pilot of the Emo, could he stay on his wrong side of the Narrows in order to let him go to a certain berth in the basin. The signals came back, yes. So the Emo was proceeding through the Narrows on her wrong side. She might have been heading to her proper side of the Narrows, but just at that point, a tug towing barges came out from the Halifax side, and this meant that the Emo had still to stay off course.
Meanwhile, the munitions-laden Monblanc had also entered the Narrows and, guided by local harbour pilot Francis Mackey, was calmly proceeding in her proper channel. Until Mackey sighted the masts of the Emo less than 3/4 of a mile ahead of him.
Elle est sur notre côté du canal.
Signal for her to move.
Mackey gave one whistle blast, meaning this ship is in its proper channel maneuver away. He was astonished when Emo returned with 2 blasts, meaning she was moving still closer to the Dartmouth shore.
There is some conflict here as to whether the whistle signals that were traded between the Emo and the Monblanc, the ones sounded by the Emo could have been sounded for the tug and barge, and mistakenly heard and answered by the Monblanc. So that's always been a question.
On board Monblanc, pilot Francis Mackey and Captain Aim Le Medec were aghast as they watched Emo moving steadily toward them. They ordered all engines brought dead slow, but it took some time for the steamer, weighed down by her deadly cargo, to respond.
Now, I'm sure that the people on Emo knew that the ship was there, but I'm not sure that they could determine exactly which way it was heading. The inbound ship is directly in the glare of the sun on the water.
As Captain Frome on the Emo ordered his engines full astern, Mackey and Le Medec shouted orders in 2 languages, putting Monblanc hard a port to bring both ships parallel.
What is she doing?
Elle continue d'arriver.
It was too late. When Emo put her engines astern a second time, Le Medec knew a collision was imminent.
When the Emo put her engine astern, it caused the bow to swing to starboard, which was the same direction that the Monblanc was turning to port at the same time. The combination of both actions, regardless of whistle signals or anything else, caused the collision.
The bow of the Emo hit the Monblanc directly in the hole of her number 2 compartment. Sparks ignited instantly, and a fire began to rage. The ships backed away from each other. Emo's captain, unaware of Montblanc's cargo, chose to head slowly back toward the Bedford Basin to assess her damage. Aboard Monblanc, Captain Le Medec expected his vessel to explode at any minute.
Abandonnez le bateau! Tout le monde abandonne le bateau!
Le Medec and his crew took to their lifeboats. They rowed like men possessed, shouting warnings to anyone within earshot.
C'est une bombe flottante! Elle va exploser!
Those warnings went largely unheeded.
Well, it's classic Canadian story, of course. To quote a British sailor, he said, I could hear the Frenchies shouting, but I didn't speak French. Nobody here spoke French. So they were always blamed for not warning anybody, but they only spoke French. They didn't speak English. What happens when the ship starts drifting, nobody in the harbor knows that it's carrying munitions.
The ship was fast becoming an inferno, drifting slowly toward the Halifax shore. Black gasoline smoke was beginning to billow from amidst the fiery red flames, shells exploding, flashing through the smoke as the blaze consumed the live ammunition on deck.
We have lots of testimony that this ship was a fascinating sight, and the shells started exploding, and the barrels of gasoline started exploding. It was a fireworks display in the harbor, so everybody gathered to watch.
On shore, in the Richmond district, residents with views of the harbor had front row seats for the drama fast unfolding in their front yards. Eric Davidson, then only a toddler, still retains memories of that morning.
I was playing with a little train on the windowsill, like, and looking out the window at the same time, and these flames shooting up from this ship. A lot of people, when they saw this fire, they started heading for it so they could get a better view. Barbara Orr was one of the people in our church, and she was on her way like a lot of people were.
14-year-old Barbara Orr and her family had recently moved to a beautiful new home with a picture window looking right out on Halifax Harbor. Since Barbara and her 6 younger brothers and sisters were home that day, quarantined because of chickenpox, they had an enviable view of the disaster.
They watched the fire break out, and the children's excited exclamations and cries brought their mother and the younger children. And Barbara and Ian wanted to go out and run down the hill to get a better view. Mrs. Orr could see everybody gathering along the waterfront. She saw sailors, she saw all sorts of people, and saw no danger. So she said, all right.
The fiery Monblanc was drifting ever closer to Pier 6, toward the very heart of the bustling Richmond waterfront. Other ships in the harbor noticed the flames and courageously came to assist. Captain Horatio Brannan of the Stella Maris, the same tug that had contributed to the Emo's fatal detour, dropped the scows he was towing and attempted to pull the burning ship away from the shore. Crew members from 2 other ships joined the valiant effort to put out the fire. Someone on shore alerted the city fire department. Soon the bells of Halifax's sparkling new motor-powered fire engine, lovingly christened the Patricia, could be heard ringing through the streets of the North End.
Alan and Gordon and I, we started for school, and we knew there was something radically wrong because Halifax's first motor fire engine passed us. And we were quite taken. We said something really must be going on. So we started to cross the street so we could look out into the harbor.
Most of the hundreds who gathered at the waterfront saw the burning ship as an exciting spectacle, not a danger. Down at the railway terminal, however, a sailor managed to warn 2 dispatchers, "There's a steamer coming into the wharf on fire. There's likely to be an explosion." The first train dispatcher dropped his work and hurried home. His partner, young Vince Coleman, husband, father, and dedicated wireless operator, decided he ought to stay and tap out one last message. Munition ship on fire in the harbor, making for Pier 6. Goodbye. Sea Tales will return in a moment.
Lie, Counselor, and it's bedtime for Bunny!
Now, which battery will last over 30% longer in these palm-top computers? Duracell or Energizer?
Energizer!
Someday, Bunny.
Dodge sponsors Biography because life is about change. Employ it to achieve. Embrace it to move ahead. Shape it to innovate. From cars and trucks to minivans and more, it's about change. The new Dodge.
How long does it take to turn the new Dodge Durango from the sport utility with the most passenger room in its class into the one with the most cargo room? Not long enough. Durango, new ground for the new Dodge.
Hi, I'm Judy Collins. What does Christmas mean to me? It's the music of the holidays, the family coming together, the memories. And if I could give the perfect gift, it would be the songs I love the best. Join me for a very special Christmas here on A&E when I perform your holiday favorites and mine.
Judy Collins, Christmas at the Biltmore Estate, Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern on A&E.
It's A&E's special gift to you.
Season's greetings from Maxwell House.
As long as the world is a little warmer this time of year. As long as elves outnumber Scrooges. Just as long as the best gifts come without ribbons or tags, Maxwell House will always be good to the last drop.
And so the prince entered the sleeping castle, breaking the spell as
Hansel and Gretel came upon the evil witch's cottage.
And Tinkerbell helped rescue the lost boys from the pirates, and they all...
Now you can buy children a lot of happy endings, because every time you use Visa, we'll contribute to Reading is Fundamental, dedicated to helping children learn to read. So please use your Visa card, because every child deserves a good beginning.
Jack climbed down the beanstalk, narrowly
Visa,
escaping.
it's everywhere you want to be.
We now return to Sea Tales on A&E. By 9 a.m. on December 6, 1917, most residents and workers in the north end of the city knew of the spectacularly burning ship drifting toward their docklands.
At the Hillis Foundry, the people climbed up on the roof. At the Royal Naval College, which had a picture window, the naval cadets gathered at the window. So a lot of people are watching, many of them at the windows.
14-year-old Barbara Orr and her 5 brothers and sisters had been given permission by their mother to join the crowd of onlookers at the pier.
Barbara and Ian and one of the younger ones were running down the hill. Barbara took a detour to go and get a friend to come and watch with her. And she said, all of a sudden, everything went completely silent.
Seconds before 9:05 a.m., the Monblanc blew up with a force that completely shattered her 3,000 tons of steel. The barrel of one gun landed 3.5 miles away at Albro Lake, Dartmouth. Part of her anchor, weighing 1,140 pounds, flew more than 2 miles. Chunks of metal flew, maiming and killing all over the city. Cape Breton, more than 270 miles away, felt the jolt.
Barbara Orr said she felt as if she was somersaulting in and out of deep holes. She came to herself well up in Fort Needham, some distance from where she had been. One of her tightly laced knee-high boots was off. Her leg, of course, very painful because the blast had literally sucked the boot off her foot.
The explosion all at once happened while we were looking at it. And the glass blew in, of course, and took my eyesight. Well, it kept my eyes pretty bad.
As the mushroom cloud began to clear, it revealed a devastated landscape. The Richmond district was flattened. Entire buildings like the enormous Acadia sugar refinery, the Hillis Foundry, the railway depot, and the Richmond School were reduced to rubble in seconds.
When I came conscious, I was laying face down on the street. And I know I can remember, must have struck my face because my nose was bleeding and I could feel it run down. And there was a nail stuck in my forehead and something hit me across the back. I think that school bag, if I hadn't had it on, whatever hit me in the back, I guess I would have been somewhere else. There's no question about that school bag, that it saved me.
Down in the harbor, the concussion created an instant tidal wave, powerful enough to sweep the Emo all the way to the opposite shore. Emo's entire bridge crew were killed instantly. Most of the valiant rescue crew from the Stella Maris and the other ships also perished. Within seconds, a thick and oily rain of soot began to fall, blackening everything it touched.
And this black rain, which has since been analyzed to be coal dust and oil and coal, went into all the wounds. There were no antibiotics in those days. Most of the wounds were infected because of this black dust.
Gordon was standing up in this field, in this open field, and I didn't know who it was. I couldn't tell who it was because he was just as black as but he had a wristwatch with one of those metal protectors on the dial, and I could see light shining on that, and I knew it was Gordon. That's the only way I knew it was Gordon.
James and his brother Gordon joined the thousands of dazed survivors, wandering like sleepwalkers through the landscape of devastation. Then, 8 years old, Edith Hartnett was among the others lost in the smoldering wreckage.
I saw this man, and he had his hands up, and he said, "Oh my God, where am I?" I guess his eyes, his whole face was blackened in blood, and he was falling in the rubble, you know.
My mother could see people running on the streets, wringing their hands, and, you know, there was desperate sights, and some people were laying on the street and not moving. And there was people just going here and there, not knowing where they were going.
The total destruction spread for 325 acres, killing more than 1,600 people instantly and wounding more than 9,000 others.
So we have the people killed by the explosion, the people washed overboard who died, the people bleed to death, the people trapped in the wreckage who burned to death, and the people so seriously injured they die because of infection. So we've got carnage. The North End is essentially now on fire.
The explosion toppled the wood and coal-burning stoves that insulated families from the bitter Nova Scotian winter, igniting thousands of wooden dwellings with barely any firefighting force left to extinguish them.
The Patricia with a full crew and the fire chief with his officers in a car had just reached Pier 6 when the ship exploded, and this was very unfortunate. They were killed, and this meant the city was left with very, very little firefighting equipment and with very few firemen.
3-year-old Mary Murphy and her family barely escaped their own burning house.
The hall stove was tipped over, just ready to set fire to everything. And my brother told me that when he was going up the street, and he looked up Albert Street, and every house was on fire. So we were lucky that way that we got away from that.
Barbara Orr looked down towards where her own house was, but there was nothing but smoke and flames, and she knew there was no use going down there. She eventually got to her aunt's house, where her cousin Bill lived.
She was met by my mother, who didn't recognize her, and she had to tell us who she was because of this black substance.
Then her aunt said to her, "Where are the others?" And Barbara said, "They're all gone."
Sea Tales will return in a moment.
The new Dodge wanted to take the sport utility concept to a higher level. Enter the new Durango. Its best-in-class power, cargo space, and seating for up to 8 raise the bar considerably, as do its strongest-in-class frame and its stable, longer, wider stance. Dodge Durango, a higher form of sport utility, from top to bottom. Durango, new ground for the new Dodge.
It's time for a classic gift for the whole family to enjoy. A&E Home Video presents this MasterCard exclusive offer. 2 lavish productions of Jane Austen's greatest works, Pride and Prejudice and the incomparable Emma.
Beautiful.
Get both for just $99.95 when you use your MasterCard, a 20% savings. Call 1-800-807-6726 to order the Jane Austen collection today and get a 20% savings exclusively from MasterCard. An A&E special.
Do you believe in magic?
Do you believe?
The will to believe is a very powerful thing if you can induce it.
This is the story of the world's oldest performing art.
He's upside down and visible.
Where the hand is quicker than the eye.
How does it work? I can't tell you.
This is the story of magic.
It's the story of magic.
Sunday on A&E.
Hi, I'm Judy Collins. What does Christmas mean to me? It's the music of the holidays, the family coming together, the memories. And if I could give the perfect gift, it would be the songs I love the best. Join me for a very special Christmas here on A&E when I perform your holiday favorites and mine.
Judy Collins, Christmas at the Biltmore Estate, Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern on A&E.
It's A&E's special gift to you.
Every month, the compelling true stories of extraordinary people. From A&E comes Biography Magazine. In the December issue, Kirstie Alley speaks her mind. Order now, and with your paid subscription, receive Kitaro's Peace on Earth CD. Enjoy an entire year for only $18. Call 1-800-238-2800 and order Biography Magazine, because every life has a story.
We now return to Sea Tales on A&E. Just hours after a munitions explosion leveled the north end of Halifax, courageous heroes began to distinguish themselves from the devastated masses. Soldiers and sailors, mothers and grandmothers, even little children banded together to pull their loved ones and neighbors from the wreckage.
Now, Halifax links to Boston by train. The Boston Express had just passed the last station. It was coming in. It was rocked by the explosion. The passengers got off the train, took axes off the train, started rescuing people, took down the Pullman sheets, drained water from the boiler, and started bandaging people as best they could.
Just hours after the initial blast, in the relatively unscathed south end of the city, some forward-thinking officials were already formulating a brilliant plan for an organized response.
The deputy mayor is a guy called Colwell. 2 hours and 25 minutes after the explosion, Colwell convenes a meeting at City Hall, and they form food committees, clothing committees, transportation committees, fuel committees. They set up a morgue committee. They have an alderman take over the fire department, and Judge Harris organizes financial credit with the Bank of Nova Scotia. So we have a formal relief organization going in the first few hours. It's a very dramatic response.
As the news of the disaster reached the outside world, doctors, nurses, medical and relief supplies began pouring in from other parts of Canada, as well as from the New England states. But many would-be rescuers traveling by train were thwarted in their attempt to help the dying and wounded, as the already crippled Halifax was hit with a different kind of disaster. A record-breaking blizzard.
And there come a big snowstorm, a big blizzard. It was an awful snowstorm. But the men come and they put some plywood to our windows, you know. It was awful cold, and, you know, it was terrible.
They were lining up for relief, food, for clothing. It was freezingly cold. It added very greatly to the misery, and it made it extremely difficult to continue with the rescue work. They were having to dig through snow as well as everything else.
It was terrible. We have to keep warm. Try to keep warm and get some food. And they used to give us little cookies, you know, they were shaped like a maple leaf, and with maple in them. That was a dessert. I never want to see those cookies anymore. We got lots of those.
Despite the snow, the cold, and the enormity of the disaster, heroic rescue efforts continued unabated. Volunteers piled the dead like cordwood and brought the wounded to the overfilled hospitals. A full 26 hours after the blast, a relief party of soldiers heard a muffled cry from under the rubble of a leveled apartment building. They found a 23-month-old girl trapped beneath an overturned ash can. Annie Ligon's mother and brother had been killed in the explosion. The newspapers called her the miracle baby.
I suppose when the bang went, I was blown into the ash pan. I was buried. That's how I kept warm, I guess, too, because it was snow the next day. And they always called me Ash Pan Annie for that.
During the weeks following the explosion, news of World War I took the back pages as Halifax immersed itself in recovering from the greatest man-made explosion before Hiroshima. Money began to flow in from sympathetic governments worldwide: America, Great Britain, Australia, even China. The most appreciated support came from the Red Cross and the people of Boston, Massachusetts, who supplied as a gift, not as charity, thousands of pieces of new furnishings, appliances, and utensils for the Halifax families who had lost everything. For the nearly 20,000 Halifax homeless, Massachusetts again pitched in. The local and visiting labor began construction of temporary housing as early as January of 1918, erected at the astonishing rate of 1 apartment every hour. For those families unable to rebuild on their pre-explosion lots, the structures were a godsend.
Well, I guess my parents didn't have enough money to build a house, but we lived for a while down on the commons. I call them tar paper houses because they were only small, just in-line houses. A lot of the people that lost their homes in the Halifax explosion went there, and they rented these homes from the Relief Commission. We were all injured, and we all recovered, and we were one of the luckiest families in the city, I think, because there were a lot of families that were taken out altogether.
Although the initial crisis had passed, for months to come the city would be consumed with the most tragic aspect of its recovery: the search for missing loved ones and the identification of the dead. The basement of the Chibukto Road School became an impromptu city morgue, lined wall to wall with unidentified bodies.
Bodies which were considered identifiable were embalmed to help preserve them. So many people have been taken to hospital that families might need time before they could identify one of their relatives. Enormous care was taken by the mortuary committee. Their reports make very interesting and touching reading.
Number 1074, female about 20 years, dark brown hair, fair complexion, 1 narrow plain gold wedding ring,
Number
1 gilt brooch.
Headless, age uncertain, keyring with 4 large keys, penknife, crucifix and Roman Catholic.
Number 75, schoolboy about 8 years, 2 pencils, 1 eraser with markings, 1 clear marble.
When the explosion happened, my father was injured very, very badly. And he was unrecognizable because there was a lot of black liquid, and his clothes were blown off, most of them, and no means of identification. And he was moved from place to place so that my mother didn't find him for 2 weeks. She just went from place to place, and these morgues were set up at different places, different schools and different public buildings where their bodies were laid out for identification. And so she was forced to go through all that.
Bill Orr's mother finally discovered her husband recovering on an American hospital ship anchored in the basin. But others' long searches proved much more heartbreaking.
It took so long for them to get these people to find out. Some of them had no identification on them to tell who they were. Catherine lost her life. She was in the house, and the house, there was nothing left but ashes. And Alan, of course, I don't know just how long it was before Alan's body was found. My father, of course, his body wasn't found until the following April. He was, of course, buried when the refinery collapsed. He was buried under it.
Vincent Patterson Sr.'s remains were finally identified because he was wearing the watch he'd borrowed from his son James just before leaving for work on December 6th. The watch hands had frozen at 10 minutes after 9. Young James always liked to keep it just a few minutes fast. Sea Tales will return in a moment.
We all know how much help buddies can be.
Looking good. You all right on that?
So get the new Workmate. The powerful clamp that can go anywhere and hold anything.
Oh.
The new Workmate.
Breeze feels good, doesn't it?
Built by Black & Decker.
Oh, glad you could come. I've heard so much about you.
Oh. Bola.
Yeah.
Mind if I take off my shoes?
No, not at all.
Mind if I try a little of that?
No, go right ahead.
Great meal.
Oh.
Mind if I watch a little TV?
No. No problem.
You're always at home with Bola.
When I was 14, my grandpa took me to Canada. We went walleye fishing. Oh.
We've got a taste kids love. And that's why we keep popping up in kitchens across the country. Hungry Jack waffles. We even give you 4 more than the other guys. More crispy waffles with moist, tender insides. So kids get more of the waffles they love. And we keep popping up. Kids want more, we give you more. Hungry Jack waffles.
You're a time traveler, and 4,000 years await you. As you uncover the hidden truths, you find a new adventure every night. And Monday, Uncle Sam wants you, not for your patriotism and bravery, but for your criminal connections. Eavesdrop on secret deals between the military and the mafia on an all-new In Search of History. Monday at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific on the History Channel.
Where's he going? Mountains? River? Both? It's Tuesday. People work on Tuesday.
Subscribe to the Wall Street Journal now and get our gift of 2 weeks free. That's 12 weeks for just 66 cents a day.
Call 800-445-3883. That's 800-445-3883.
We now return to Sea Tales on A&E. On December 17th, 2 weeks after the explosion, Halifax wept at the first burial of the explosion's unidentified dead. 3,000 mourners attended the service.
When a disaster like that takes place, it's bound to leave some marks. Could make you bitter. Could make you bitter.
It was a turning point, no question about it. You often wonder, what would have been like had it not happened. But that's life,
As the immediate crisis began to abate, the city's focus turned to responsibility. How could this unprecedented disaster have happened? The newspapers cried out for blood. Citizens murmured rumors of sabotage and negligence. The official inquiry began on December 12, 1917, just 6 days after the explosion. With the captain, pilot, and bridge crew of the Emo dead, it became clear early in the proceedings that the surviving French crew of the Monblanc would become the designated scapegoats.
First of all, we're at war. You have to realize this is a war and people do dumb things. And the Americans loaded this ship in a way that's totally incompetent and inadequate. So, first of all, the Americans are at fault. Secondly, the British told them to load it. They're responsible for it. Third, the French were doing it all the time. So this is a disaster brought to Canada by the Americans, the British, and the French. The problem was that the lawyer for the inquiry didn't want to blame the Americans, the French, or the British. So the inquiry was really a farce from the beginning, in my view. I don't think there was any real intent to find out the real problem.
On February 4th, 1918, Justice Arthur Drysdale came back with his verdict. The Monblanc was solely responsible for the collision, and Captain Lemedec, Pilot Mackey, as well as the Halifax harbourmaster, were all charged with manslaughter, arrested, then released on bail.
There was an appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada, at which there were 5 judges. 2 blamed the Monblanc, 2 blamed the Emo, and the 5th said both ships were at fault. Now, at that time, Canada was a dominion, so the highest court was the Privy Council in London. At that appeal, both ships were blamed.
No one in Halifax took much comfort in the results of the various hearings. Over the years, the rumors persisted. Could there have been German spies aboard the Emo who engineered a collision? In July of 1918, the Llandovery Castle was destroyed just outside Halifax Harbour by a U-boat torpedo, the work of German spies stationed in Halifax. Speculation continues to this day.
I've met people who've said, but of course it was sabotage. Of course there were spies. Of course it was the Germans. Many people believed that always.
The ship that caused the destruction is still very much a part of present-day Halifax. Pieces of the Monblanc have been preserved in the places they fell that chilly December morning. As for Emo, thrown by the tidal wave onto the Dartmouth shore, she was refloated, renamed, and resumed her career as a whaler in the South Pacific until she struck some shoals off the Falkland Islands just 3 days short of the explosion's 4-year anniversary.
She's still there, lying in the bottom of a cold, rocky sea.
Harbour officials tightened security procedures dramatically after the explosion. The event became a warning to all maritime ports never to take munition ships quite so lightly in proximity to highly trafficked waterways. Over the years following 1917, life gradually returned to normal for the maritime city. The war that had caused the disaster finally ended. In the north end of the city, the rebuilding continued.
People tended to shy away from that part of the city. I know that in our case, we tended to move to the south end to get away from it. The odd person built in the old, on their own site, but that was very rare. Most of this area remained like a war zone for many years. You could drive through street after street after street, but nothing but foundations there, no homes.
Finally, the Relief Committee began construction of permanent housing for the displaced, built with a new cement blocking called Hydra stone. Shell-shock survivors were understandably suspicious about the safety of any dwelling, but Hydra stone had a quality that helped to quell their fears. It was fireproof. Many survivors still reside in the Hydra stone district till this day. For the over 200 explosion orphans, December 6th, 1917 was the beginning of a completely new life. 14-year-old Barbara Orr lost her mother, father, and 5 brothers and sisters on that fateful morning.
She came and lived with us and became like another sister to me. In memory of her family, she donated the bells to the church, which eventually became the explosion bells.
The legacy of the explosion lingers in present-day Halifax. In hidden corners of the city, survivors have placed memorials to their lost loved ones, and their minds frequently drift back to that bleak December morning 80 years ago.
I remember it like it was yesterday. I can remember everything that happened. 7 people in one family is a lot to lose. We always missed them. Wish they had lived.
We never went back to Halifax. Of course, we had nothing in Halifax. Everything we owned in Halifax was gone, completely gone. if it did come up, somebody would speak about it. Mom would go into one of these depressed spells. So it wasn't talked about. It wasn't that we had forgotten it by any means.
The thing that always struck me was today when tragedies happen, the counselors are all right on call that very day, but there were no counselors in those days. They just seemed to, with inner strength of some kind, that they survived. And it's hard to realize that all this part of the city was just flattened in a few minutes. When you think it was well built up houses and streets, and all of a sudden nothing.
It's long been said that in times of war, mastery of the oceans ensures almost certain victory. Yet for those caught between hostile powers and the waves, the sea's dangers can sometimes surpass her many bounties.
Now you can own a video cassette of this program. Call